Hi Janine, could you present yourself firstly?
Hi, my name is Janine O'Keeffe and I'm an Australian born, living in Stockholm, and I work with Fridays for Future. I've worked also partially with Extinction Rebellion, and this week I'm actually working with Last Generation.
We are seeing an increase of fossil fuel explorations all around the world in front of the background of the Russian invasion to Ukraine and increasing prices for oil and gas. What is your take on this?
We have a few people, not that very many, maybe 50, maybe 100 people who own oil, gas and coal. Maybe if you include the private industry of coal in Germany, maybe it's 200. But the take there is that a few people can make a profit out of this. And our society is set up to enable that profit making. So once Russia had to reduce, that meant that all the other explorations just went, okay, let's have some fun. Let's make sure that we make money this time, and even more money. And the truth is, most people understand that we need to use less gas, coal and oil. So this is sort of like a fire sale from that industry to make as much money off this industry before the stranded assets are finally stranded. So we have an issue to understand how to strand these assets, how to make sure that they're kept and not used, because our society or our economic system doesn't enable that really. Maybe through the constitution of the German system, that you've actually had a constitutional judge say that your constitution is, your government is not aligned with the constitution. Maybe that can have an effect, but you don't see it in the actual economic system yet.
Huge climate protests took place in 2009 and brought the climate crisis and the climate emergency to the forefront. For the first time, climate crisis became an issue for elections. There was European elections in a lot of countries, not only in Germany. In the course of the corona pandemic, the invasion of Russia and Ukraine, and high inflation, climate protection again is missing as a topic. Especially in the US and in Europe, policies are actually going in the opposite direction, while global emissions have risen again last year. What has gone wrong in your view?
And I think you meant 2019.
2019,
yes.
Sorry, yeah.
So COVID, which actually reduced emissions through a lot of people staying home, reducing flights, and a lot of consumption emissions were reduced. And people sort of dropped the ball a little bit, not understanding that this is structural, and that the structural side is far more important. So as soon as people felt free to not wear their masks and to not, just live locally, even though they live perfectly well, Europeans and Americans, the key emitters of carbon dioxide, the Western nations, we dominate the emissions for the past 60 years. So we are historically both morally to blame, and we're still emitting a massive amount. Even though we are doing this, our ability as a consumer to change our behavior is very, very low. And that's why we need infrastructural methods. System change is what Greta talks about. And I think that is perfectly right, because it's very hard to ask one person to do this change, and whereas the system is actually set up with subsidies to push everybody in the direction of more emissions.
You have taken part in organizing these climate strikes and have advised Greta Thunberg and Fridays for Future, of course, from the beginning on. Climate strikes and civil disobedience acts are still going on. I was in Glasgow at the climate conference and I saw a huge demonstration before the election here in Germany. 1.4 million people were in the streets protesting the policy of the German government. But still, it is an uphill battle, and it's getting more difficult for mobilization. You have in the US a discussion about how to reach out to everyday people struggling to make ends meet. In your view, what are the strategic challenges right now for the climate movement, and especially for Fridays for Future?
Fridays for Future, similar to Extinction Rebellion, is very much based on local groups deciding for themselves what they choose to do. Be they school groups or adult groups, they take the ball themselves and run. There is central groups making some decisions, but they're fairly, their decisions are fairly general. So from a strategic viewpoint, I'd prefer to talk about the climate movement first, and then maybe that can reflect on Fridays for Future. I see, because I don't just work with Fridays for Future, I work with any climate movement. In fact, I was with, before Fridays for Future, I was with a group called Climate Parliament in Stockholm, or in Sweden, and Climate Action, which is also a Swedish-based group. Mm-hmm. So, and now I'm actually with a group called Climate Alliance, which is a new party in Sweden. So if you imagine yourself having a keyboard, a piano keyboard, and one tangent is Extinction Rebellion, another one is Fridays for Future, another one Last Generation, another one Återställa vårt mark, which is Restore the Wetlands, another one Fridays for Future, or perhaps I've already mentioned them.
Sunrise Movement in the US.
Exactly, and you can go on to many. And some of them, you don't play very often because they're not really close to you, but you try to cooperate with them as much as possible. But we all play our own tune. So it's about helping people to understand that they have a breadth of options, and they can use any or many of these options at the same time or one at a time, and giving them that power. So that to me is a strategic step, to not just see yourself as one group and then therefore, I'm not part of that group, and that group, and that becomes what I would call a critical process, where you're always saying, I'm not part of them, so they did that wrong, and then they did that wrong. But the truth is, everybody's experimenting. And it's about more coming back to yourself and saying, how many groups do I want to be part of? Because this is a community, and I can gain what I would call activist integrity, activist empowerment through this process and this community, and respectfulness, and create respectful relationships. From that, I also own my own keyboard. So we all play as much as we can, as many keys as possible, and try to be in sync and join others. But sometimes there's maybe an action which is going on that you don't feel entirely comfortable with, but it just means you back off that key. Mm-hmm. And you might use it next week or next month. And that's an important step for people as individuals to take, to have that respect. So that I would see as strategic. From a more general viewpoint, I think the entire climate community needs to grow up. It needs to accept that the enemy is hundreds, if not thousands times larger. And we have been a movement since really the Silent Springs, or maybe earlier. And our governments haven't been listening. Even with Fridays for Future, who you say, it affected elections, it made some decisions, but how many of those decisions in the governments are real and thorough? Most of them are only doing adaptation. Not many of them, if any of them, are doing really mitigation, which is reduction of carbon dioxide. And most of them are not actually truly, many of them have declared climate emergency, but they don't talk about it like COVID, and it's far worse than COVID. And how many of them are doing serious emergency warning systems? Look at the R Valley. The R Valley, they had 4 days notice from the meteorologist. How much did that reach those people? And then when I was just down in the R Valley, when the measurements were off the scale, the group who were looking at the measurements just said, the equipment's broken. Mm-hmm. And the truth is, the equipment is broken, but the equipment is the human equipment. And it's the government equipment who's not accepting and not speaking the truth loudly and clearly and preparing people for the crisis we are currently seeing and have been seeing for a decade or two. And we're going to see far more, far quicker.
What do you say to people who accuse the climate movements to be academic, speaking to academic circles? I mean, we have this discussion in the US. Sunrise Movement is saying we have to reach out of the bubble and to reach out to everyday people to start to get a real mass movement. What do you say to these critics?
I would say, actually, for me, I've already seen the mass movement. You have 100 million people striking in India, farmers. That is a mass movement. Join them, bring them in, teach them climate.
What are they demanding, the people in India?
I don't actually know their demands. I'd have to claw through them. But I imagine they've got water issues. That would be my first guess. And that can easily be coupled to climate. So while the climate has been forced into being academic, don't get me wrong, the denial process has been massive, and it's easily and well understood with merchants of doubt. And the 60 years of cigarette denial was repeated or even made perfected, I would say, with climate, to the point where we're now, far closer to the brink. 7 of the 9 planetary boundaries are crossed or are breaking, and the other 2 don't even have methods to measure. So it could be all 9 are broken. And Johan Rockström from Potsdam Institute here in Berlin says all life on Earth is threatened. All life, not just human life, all. And that's a bit of a shocker. You can also look at Antonio Guterres, who says that to not lead on climate is criminal. So any government, any industry, anyone with power, including adults, to not lead on climate is criminal. Whether our children will be taking us personally to court or they will disown us, I don't know. But while we do not lead on climate, we deserve it. And even people talk about, if we look in Germany, Angela Merkel, the wind and the solar industry, which was built up in the early 2000s and then disseminated by right-wing policies. And many of it was cooperative and small community-based. And what they did was regulate it to actually limit the power of those industries a lot. And now the removal of the wind industry from, is it Rostock?
In Rostock, but also in other German countries.
To India, fine, yes. India also needs a wind ability to build wind, but there's no reason why those 600 people who are currently working there don't take that over and run with it. I do know there's good reasons from a political viewpoint with the World Trade Authority and the trade agreements and the partnerships between countries that you're not allowed to go in as a government. But the truth is, this is war. This is war in our society, war on poor people, war on Global South Indigenous people. It has been war on Indigenous people for hundreds of years. We have to face the fact that, as it is criminal. If the UN is saying your lack of leadership on climate is criminal, you must back out of these agreements. You must just say, I'm sorry, until climate is underway well, we will neglect that agreement. Because we need to build up our own industry. The German people need to be able to get in there and create good wind, good solar, and be able to maintain those systems, be able to build. Germany is one of the leading engineering nations of the world. You have the ability, and you show it in your early work in wind. You basically brought the price of solar down to 10%, if not 2%. You did brilliant work. Maybe we need to give the Danish the credit when it comes to the wind, but you also, it was right near Denmark where there's a huge amount of wind as well. And so you as a people and as individuals have the power. It's about taking that power and making the government follow you instead of following a few fossil industries who want to keep making money.
What do you think? You have answered it a little bit. What do you think about the German government, coalition of Greens, Liberals and Social Democrats here in Germany? What do you think about the government in regards to climate policies right now?
I think, is it Robert Habeck? I'm not sure if I have his name completely right. From what I've understood, and I haven't read a lot about him, but he's getting on YouTube and he's explaining, I'm doing this now, but I don't want to do it. Okay? That is exactly the right strategy. What he's saying is that I'm being forced in government to go down a path which I don't want to, but I do it temporarily because my plan is B. My plan is different. And that will get the people on board. That will galvanize the people on board. That will galvanize both the climate activists and the climate industry, because there's a lot of industry in wind and solar, but it will also galvanize people who, what I would call, because engineers classically, as an engineer myself, engineers classically tend to be deniers. People who say, it's all stuff, we can't fix this, we need to find better technology, all this sort of denial, what I would call shells of denial. These people, when they feel that a genuine politician talking deeply about what strategies they can find within the maze of the government system, they will join. And so I think there are selected people in every government who understand climate and do things well. But I suspect, and more of the German situation I don't understand, but I do understand the Swedish and the Australian. If you look at the traditional parties, there are good climate people. Some of them, at position 35, they're a climate activist, and they do actually understand solar well, or they're a scientist, or they have some sort of background in one of the areas, maybe even ecocide and understanding the forests and why we need to maintain those. Those people, they're in position number 35, but only 25 get in. So then they continue to write, propositions to the government, change this, change that, fix that. And that has been going on for 60 years. So the government's power is showing to be incapable of fixing climate. And it has shown that for decades. That's why civil disobedience is so important. Be it civil disobedience of a strike, Fridays for Future, be it blockades and die-ins like Extinction Rebellion, or blocking autobahns like Just Stop Oil, Last Generation and Restore the Wetlands, and Blockade Australia. All these things show, and traditionally we know, democracy does not exist without civil disobedience. It was there for suffrage, it was there for suffragettes, it was there for civil rights. It needs to now be there for nature, be it climate, be it ecocide, be it whatever system. Because the truth is, we can't vote out the climate. We can't negotiate and say, by the way, we've got 50% of the vote now, can you listen, can you do what we want, climate? That's not science. Science is based on fact, and the fact is the climate is reacting, and we have caused this problem, and we as human beings need to act. And that requires, because climate is so global in its nature and doesn't have any borders, therefore we need to act and change our economic system. So profit for the sake of profit. So one guy is richer than another person, and basically, or if we go back to Ukraine, the gas lines and the pipelines via Ukraine are basically pumping Russian fossil fuels, which creates a money input to the Russian military system. That is basically the blood of Ukraine. We must stand with Ukraine. We should have stood firmer with Yemen. We should have stood firmer with Syria, with Kenya, with Afghanistan. All the people, the grassroots people. And the truth is, the Russian war is not a Russian war. It is a Putin war plus a few oligarchs, right? Maybe they're 10, maybe they're 100, I don't know. But the actual average person in Russia, they're not there willingly giving away their sons' lives, giving away their husbands' lives. When we talk people to people, we know we don't need to war. We know we can take care of each other, and we know we can also take care of nature, and nature can take care of us. And that's the real process we need to come to. And even for climate, the climate is more difficult because it's more of a systems thinking. It's more of a what I would call physics, where you're actually getting feedback effects and things which are accelerating incredibly out and totally out of our ability to change. And that's why really Johan Rockström says, and Antonio Guterres, and even actually I think it's Hans-Joachim Schönhuber says 98% of our children are on a bus of death. So we have a global bus, and 98% of them will die early. That's not just all the blacks in the world, all the Chinese in the world. That's not the way it is. Climate doesn't care. It will go to the R Valley. The heat in Europe will show up in some sort of flooding. I don't know where it is today, but it's also showing in the fires already. You see it in the heat in India and Pakistan showed up with 7 million people basically being drowned in Bangladesh. Which country is ready to take 7 million refugees immediately? No one. So the climate is already well beyond our ability to fix things. So we can't do it afterwards. We have to do it beforehand.
How and why did you start to get engaged in environmental and climate movements? And tell us a little bit about how you learned about Greta Thunberg's climate strikes in Stockholm, and how it all started, your involvement in the Fridays for Future movement.
So around 2017, I got involved with the Climate Parliament in Sweden, and we were a bunch of like 8 to 10 engineers, one or two economists, which sat and worked weekly, if not probably 20 hours a week, on a policy recommendation. And we worked hard. We did, and I thought it's just a matter of the science and the technology. Being an engineer myself, I was of the belief that, this is fixable, And I don't know of a single politician that read that work. Not one out of 349 in Sweden. Maybe there's one. But how many hairs on a politician's neck did it move? Probably not one. So after that, and I'd worked hard, I was basically in burnout, and we did several things over the summer. I am born in Australia, and from Melbourne, which is a working class city, similar to Glasgow, of Edinburgh, Glasgow, and similar to Gothenburg, Stockholm. And all through the 70s, people struck. They did a strike for human rights or pay or things like that. And so strikes were probably, something was happening once a week or at least once a month. So for me, it was a natural part of the instinct. So after my severe disappointment, we actually had a train trip to Copenhagen, and on the way down I did climate action because the Swedish election was coming up. Climate action with climate action with a local person in Lund. And then I got a cold in Copenhagen. And then on the way back by the train, things just were terrible, and I was in bed for 3 days. Greta started, so that was the 17th of August, and then Greta started on the 20th. And then on the 24th of August, I was chatting through Facebook with a climate group, and somebody said there's a young kid striking in Stockholm. this is worth seeing. So as soon as I was capable, I think it was a Tuesday after in her second week, I was in there and talking to her. And I found that she actually understood climate, which was it's not an easy science. But she was interested and she was determined. And I said to her, okay, so tomorrow, I'll come with my iPad and do an interview, just a short 3 minutes to send it off to Australia. I have a few people I know. Okay, great. And when I came, I sat there and we did 3 3-minute interviews, and they're on YouTube. And she said, call the what I said to her, what do you want? If the politicians came out from the parliament now and said, what do you want, Greta? What would you say? And she said, I want them to call the climate crisis a crisis. So I want to call the climate crisis a crisis and act upon it. She did say and act. And that was like, this person needs to have a voice heard, and this needs to be as big as possible, as quick as possible. So she started with School Strike for Climate. I then worked with the Norwegian team, the Norwegian students who were doing a strike planned for the 7th of September. Had contact with The Hague, which was also another student group. There was some very young ones, which were like 9 years of age, so I had contact with them. But then there was many older people that began to join, the 50-year-olds, people like me. But they also understood it was school strikes. Okay, so it wasn't. I immediately sent this work over to Australia and did as much as I could there. That produced, that actually culminated on the 30th of November with 15,000 kids leaving school and screaming at their government, which then went into the COP24 process where Greta got a 2-minute speech or a 5-minute speech and did a brilliant job. On the 8th of September, at a 350 org Rise Up for Climate meeting, she was given the opportunity to speak, and she said, I will now strike, not every day, I will strike every Friday, once a week. And I was like, yes, that's exactly what we needed. Because I'm Catholic, and I went to church every Sunday till the age of 21. And meeting in small groups in community changes culture, and culture eats strategy for lunch. Okay. So I thought, so my heart, this is what we need. Okay. And she also said, everybody's welcome, everybody's needed. So I was like, this is no longer a school strike. So I'm no longer just doing what I can to make this continue. I'm here to build a much broader movement. 2 weeks later, Greta, I think it was Greta, but I'm not sure, three suggested hashtags were made. One was Fridays for Future, one was FFF, and the third one was Climate Strike. FFF was already a web page, a financial web page, so I struck that one off. The Climate Strike had already been done by a Mexican 15-year-old in 2015, I think. And I was like, oh, maybe we could use that, but it's okay, we'll move on. And Fridays for Future was untouched, electronically. So I built the Twitter account, the Facebook account, and the Instagram. And another person who was in contact with me, who understood that it was everybody now, said, I'll do the web page for you, right? So we joined together and started building the base of what was the everybody movement. And of course, we were happy to align ourselves and work with the school strikers as much as possible, and even support. But I would say we also felt that we weren't only support. We were ourselves doing action in parallel. Over the time it exploded, and much of that work has many reasons. One of them was the insightful work of Greta, which was anybody who is clearly a school striker, hello, thank you for striking, positive feedback to them and back to her. In the early stages, she would reach out to everybody, and she taught me how to reach out via Twitter. So she gave me a lesson, which was great. And I did the Facebook side, and Facebook is dominated by 50-year-old women, so that matched perfectly. And so we built the infrastructure which actually lifted people's voices. And incredibly, the web guy, he understood how to put together a map. And he put together a map, and then we had an IT guy join Jan. So Jens was the web guy, Jan was the IT guy. And the IT guy said, we have to be careful of GDPR. So if people tick the GDPR is okay, and we can put their email address on the web page, we'll do it. And so suddenly every second pin had an email address, which meant that media, and we need to understand the difference between the media companies and the individual journalists. The journalists are actually activists. Like, that's where their heart is. Their heart is with an issue, be it LGBT, be it climate, be it whatever it be. But once they grab an issue, they want it work. They want to make a big article and make it well. So they would come in and say to their boss, here, I wrote an article about the strike around the corner, and they said, that's just local, it's not global. So they got on our map, and within 2 hours they'd contacted somebody in Alaska, somebody in Australia, and somebody in China. And they said, no, it's global. And so then it was news. So we broke that glass ceiling together without realizing. When we did the map change, it was my goal was, or our goal was purely to just as many voices as possible. That was where we started. From there was these big strikes, the 30th of November, and then the 15th of March, and then the 20th and 27th of September. And to be quite honest, I had to be pushed into joining and working with those. I didn't feel that they were of value. I felt like 350 has done them, other groups have done them. You know what? That's just old news. We need to build the community from the grassroots up. That was where my soul was. I was replacing the Catholic Church in my view for climate. A slightly large ambition, but that was where my heart was. Anyway, so then I set about after the 30th of November. Because I didn't even attend COP24, and for me to go to the COP was like, I've never actually attended a COP. For me to go to a COP is like to go to the monster, the government monster, which is just there to eat you and spit you out and say sorry, and that's what Climate Parliament was about for us. We did 50 pages, hours of work in Swedish, which was very hard for me to do, and then thank you very much, and went straight into the rubbish bin, right? And that's what I saw the COPs as. So for me, those big ones were not that interesting. But I have to admit, and when the 15th of September came along, and I was the one who negotiated that date with all the community, all the Fridays for Future groups around the world. Probably at that time it was around 10 to 15, 20 dominant countries. Canada said, no, we're not going. This is a really cute story. But they were the biggest city in Montreal, even though, with at least 100,000, even though they insisted, we can't go the 15th of March. Okay, fine, because it's a school holiday. Oh, okay, well, sorry, we had to choose that. Anyway, so what I saw with the 15th of March with statistics, so we were using statistics the whole way, and that's what probably the area I can probably take most credit for, is to make sure people report their data. And you saw that the weekly doubled with the big strike. And so once the weekly doubled, then the big strikes doubled. So it was sort of like one accelerated the other. And then I went, okay, I'm sold. Big strikes are worth it. Okay. There's still enormous amounts of work, and I have a lot of respect for the people who, for example, do the negotiation of dates. That is such, it's probably weeks of work, lots of heartache, and you come out of the work where a good percentage, at least 10% of people think that you did it wrong, for some reason. And so I have enormous respect for anybody who takes on the date's work. In any case, I think I've gotten lost, but that sort of built the movement, and gradually, like, we had, in Greta, we had an enormous speaker. Her ability and talent to push the issue in tune with her audience, and in tune where the populace was, and still challenge her audience. That's many would say was a gift, and I would say yes, it is a gift. But also, you know, her mother is an opera singer, so I think possibly there's a few people around her who understand this area, and she's an incredibly gifted person. So she would, you know, sponge and suck up any information or any tips anybody had, and work it into her theory of how to make things work best. And that's really my relationship with Greta as well, is that, you know, I learn just as much from her as she does from me. You know, she even corrects me on some climate issues, climate science, that I'll come with a statistic and she'll say, well, no, that's wrong, that's not the latest, it's this. And I probably rarely do it to her, or more rarely do it to her, so less often. But that sort of, that was very much in the 2019 years, where we clearly worked in sync with each other and built. But once COVID came, it became it's sort of like as I said before, we dropped the ball. We thought that, okay, you know, people will realize now, you know, and the genie was out of the bottle that we can change. You know, people, when you said, well, this requires enormous social change, people would say, that takes years, that takes months. No, it took 3 weeks, actually. So that's crap. And there's many lies which surround and are sort of embedded in the climate story from the denial of 60 years.
What gives you hope, Janine?
People burning for climate, finding their own activism, finding their activist voice and using it well. Talking to those people, finding respect with them. Civil disobedience gives me hope. Actually, physical action on the street is, for me, it teaches me, I'm standing up for something I believe in. I'm finding my own voice, and that voice is also important for me to find. And that gives me hope, because I feel energy. I gain a lot of energy from that. Looking at the solar industry in Germany, understanding the wind industry in Germany, looking at the changes in the Ahr Valley, what people are really pushing for now. Communities, small and large communities, people believing in each other, that their community is more important than a big company. Big company, we need industry, but we don't need fossil fuel industry. We don't need multinationals, which are bigger than our governments, which undermine our democracy. We don't need that. And we need to learn how to stand up to that. That's why when the law, even in the EU, if the EU law goes against Sweden being able to perform for climate, we should say, sorry, we're not part of that now. We do as much EU law with you as possible, but not that one point. That can wait until the climate emergency is over. And we need to have that learning of our ability to say no. Still be a part of the EU community, but say we're not willing to do that.
Thanks a lot, Janine, for the interview.
I will say one last thing, if that's okay. The other thing which gives me big hope is we haven't really even started yet. We've probably only done 1% of what needs to be changed. And once we begin to work with nature, we have the biggest and most magnificent partner with us, nature. Once we work with nature, we won't even know can't even dream what is possible. So I think the biggest task is to start, and I think we'll gain a lot from that.
Thanks a lot, Janine.
Thank you.